All right. So welcome back. With our next talk. I'm happy to introduce Sören Müller. If you don't know Sören, he is one of the original developers of Webwasher. He was a co-founder and CTO for that as well. And Webwasher was part of the reason how ad blocking started back in the day. And I'm really excited to get to know a little bit of the story behind that. And Sören has a background which is very, very interesting, and I want to get it right. Sören's passion for coding was ignited in the 80s at the age of 8, when defining endless curiosity led to his dad's prized home computer. After interning at EMC, PCB design software company, and working with a bunch of complex physics simulations, Sören almost inevitably found himself co-founding a dotcom startup in the 1990s, Webwasher, followed by early retirement in the IT industry and a 10-year stint of a passion-turned day job as a video producer and aerial cinematographer. So there's a very, very varied and interesting background for Sören, and I'm really excited to get to know his story and the Webwasher story. So over to you, Sören.
Thank you. Thanks to you guys for having me. Thanks to eyeo for having me, and shout out to my old colleague Peter, who managed to convince me. This is my first talk ever, so I hope you have to cut me some slack if it's a little bit like all over the place, or if I'm trying to squish too much into this. It was definitely interesting to revisit this whole topic after 20 years. That's how long ago this whole thing started. So I can jump right in. Basically, how ad blocking started, the Webwasher story. So welcome to my little time travel talk. So to set the scene, the year was 1998. Simpler times back then, the well-beloved, in quotation marks, Windows 98 was just released. The biggest issue in American politics was like a love affair. And the makers of the Truman Show tried to warn us about reality TV, I guess, and fake news. But we all know that basically did not have any lasting effect. The browser wars were full on going. There were only two main browsers back then. Netscape Communicator in 1998 still had like a bigger market share, 64% versus Internet Explorer with like 32%, and the times were simpler maybe, but as you can see, not necessarily more beautiful. So you went online, as maybe some of us remember, with like dial-up, listening to the horrible dial-up tone. The biggest company was AOL to go online. Yahoo was still a thing, and private websites were mostly hosted on GeoCities. And not yet invented, of course. Google Chrome, YouTube did not exist, Facebook did not exist, the iPhone, the very first iPhone, did not exist, not even Skype did exist, no Bitcoin. Times were definitely simpler. But regarding Google Chrome, it's also like directly an interesting topic. It was founded in 1998. Just launched its beta version, and it was just a simple input prompt, which became its like trademark, sort of. And hard to imagine before then. Mainly, how did you use the internet? So-called web catalogs were like a thing, basically curated lists of links in different categories that you would use. That was basically how you found things when you didn't know the web address of your site directly. And most websites were still handmade HTML. There are basically no standards or a lot of conflicting standards, and the facepalm emoji there because most standards were ignored if there were any, and things like the blink tag were still a thing. Frames, iframes. I included a few nice screenshots from mostly GeoCities websites there. So yeah, that's how web pages looked, very colorful, and a lot of HTML tags and technologies that thankfully don't really exist anymore. Online ads back then, I found selected a few nice examples. Animated GIFs, forced pop-up windows, random positions, driving you mad. There were also no real internet standards. So if you want to monetize your website, you would use things like that, and it slowed down the browsing back then considerably. I mean, to be honest, that's still a thing. I personally find the difference not even that much if I nowadays browse on my phone without an ad blocker and get a lot of advertising. It sometimes feels similar, the effect of back then browsing with and without advertising filtered. But it was even a monetary thing because mostly you were online with minute-based rates, and the ads were not only stealing your attention, they were also stealing money out of your pocket because you had to pay. The biggest player was DoubleClick back then, which was established in 1995, so it wasn't around that long yet. They already did rudimentary tracking, but it was far from what Google is doing now, of course. You were not immediately presented with Amazon direct buy links to whatever you were just talking about 5 minutes earlier with some random person. That didn't work. That wasn't how it was going back then. Oops, sorry, jumped too far there. That's basically how the internet looked back then. And regarding the online ads, there's I always have to remember there was a few years later, but 5 years later, there was a very funny Dave Chappelle skit. What if the internet was a real place? That very, in my opinion, very realistically sums up how browsing without an ad filter feels like. I can highly recommend that to anybody who doesn't know it. So that was to set the scene. And now, personally for me, back then, I was just fresh out of school, and I had just finished an internship at what was already mentioned in my intro at EMC, Electromagnetic Compatibility company. They software that helps with designing circuit boards and stuff like that. So very intense physics, math, calculations, simulations, very dry stuff, but also very interesting. But I was just fresh out of that, and looking for my next opportunity, what to do next. And so for a little historic or history background back then, in my hometown where I was living, working at the time, in Paderborn, in a small town in Germany, there was a big quite a big player in the computer business back then. Heinz Nixdorf, he founded his business in the early 1950s, 1960s, so around for quite a long time. And by 1985, his company had a revenue of 4 billion Deutschmarks. That would be, it's probably hard to calculate now, like around 2 billion euros. Employed 24,000 people in 44 countries. So yeah, that was a really big company. And he put a lot of effort and money. It was really important to him to educate his employees. He gave money to funded local trade schools, things like that. And yeah, sadly he passed away with like a sudden heart attack in 1986. And up to that point, he completely neglected, bringing up a real successor for himself. So the company was kind of in peril. Siemens snatched it up in 1990. But didn't really know what to do with it. And but interestingly, it was the largest IT company in Europe till 1999. And I personally had like a connection to it. I had to include this slide. This is like the computer I learned coding on. The Nixdorf personal workstation with like a high resolution 800 by 600 pixel screen, which was not IBM compatible, but yeah, that's where I learned coding C, C++ in 1986. And sorry, just a quick question in between. Are we the Q&A? Like, should I answer questions coming up already now or like later? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, my personal connection to the company was because it was the first computer I learned coding on. My father and my uncle worked there for a while. And yeah, interestingly, in parts it's still around also like till today. It was split into Fujitsu, Siemens, and the other part was Wincor Nixdorf, which mainly does ATM and cash registers up to this day. And you probably encountered them already or encounter them on a daily basis next time you go to the ATM or are at a grocery store, which this year is probably not as often the case. But yeah, have a look at your cash register. It might be by Wincor Nixdorf. Might have the logo on it. The furthest I personally saw it was in rural New Zealand a couple of years ago. They are kind of like everywhere. And another little like side note, if you're ever around central Germany, I can highly recommend this picture on the slide before, the building there. There's like a museum in his name, Heinz Nixdorf, which is one of the biggest computer museums, at least in Europe, if not worldwide, and really interesting. I can highly recommend it if you're around that area to check it out if you're interested in computer history. Yeah, so that's basically how I ended up. Yeah, that was my personal connection with Siemens, but I came across a little renegade splinter unit at Siemens called New Business Opportunities. They were looking for student interns to help them with more technical tasks, implementing ideas that they had. That's where I met my fellow founders, Horst Jürgen and Roland Koni, and we clicked immediately, especially with Roland. I made a good team. We were kind of like crazy scientists, spending day and night in our little cubicle working. We wanted to improve like the browsing experience back then. It was all very like bare bones, and we had like long brainstorming sessions, bouncing ideas off of each other. What can we do? We were bursting with ideas, which also led to really bizarre situations. Or it was kind of weird because it was like Siemens or Siemens Ixhoff was like an old established company, and the people in the other cubicles were kind of suspicious of us at the time. Like, what are these guys doing? Why are they like laughing? Why are they having a good time here at work? That's highly suspicious to them. But yeah, so we collected like a long list of ideas and did an internal poll. I sadly don't have the original idea list anymore. It would have been like really, really nice to have a look at that. But it was like a couple of dozen detailed ideas, which were interestingly mainly focused on what you could call intelligent like browsing assistants. Like there were not like Google as a search engine wasn't around. Like search engines were very limited, and yeah, ad filtering. We were both like really annoyed by like how inefficient ads were to us, like how it was like slowing us down, stealing our attention. There was just not to us. There was just and not the way to go. It didn't make any sense. Like, why would you have like the content on the little lower screens? Like you would have like sometimes like a quarter of the screen was like the content, and the rest was like blinking ad banners, and it made sometimes like websites almost unusable. So that was like a point on the list, but like the ad filtering and filtering animations or making GIF animations into GIF or a GIF, like I don't know what to a German is GIF, but yeah, that's another topic altogether. But it was not on top of the list. But yeah, interestingly, the results, like I wanted to chime in like before I get to the next part. Like there were other tools around already, but we did not really. We were so focused on our own like storming sessions on our ideas, and because ad blocking wasn't really on top of our list that much, we weren't really looking at them. But I wanted to point out like these two that were mainly around Proxometron, which is still around in some form or the other, still by enthusiasts. The main author, Scott R. Lemon, he sadly passed away in 2004. And as you can see, he really loved colorful, slightly overloaded user interfaces. So yeah, the usability of these tools, and especially back then, these screenshots are a little bit newer. I unfortunately wasn't able to find really authentic screenshots from back then, but they were mostly blocking. I think there was like a topic before in the talk before with the DNS filter already. Back then, these proxies often were simply almost functioning like a host file or a DNS filter, and just like blocking requests and not really filtering the HTML code. Or if they were doing rudimentary filtering, they didn't really do like a good job. But the main thing was really usability. Yeah, it required like some expert nerd geek knowledge to be able to use them. So we were kind of oblivious to those tools back then, and yeah, didn't really pay attention. But I wanted to mention them, especially also Proxometron, and the other one was Junkbuster by Jason Catlett. He was really an advocate for over a long time for like internet privacy and spam topics. Like in 2000, there you can find online in the US like Senate hearings, Senate committees who he spoke to, and yeah, he really cared deeply about the subject. Yeah, and back to our little poll back then in the internet. So with all our fancy ideas that we had back then, yeah, let's make like cool, intelligent assistants. To our amusement, or like kind of astoundingly, the highest voted feature was kill the GIF animations, like filter out advertising banners, or at least make the animations not move anymore, because we had identified that as like a feasible feature because of how the GIF format works, that we could kill like everything besides the first frame, which in addition would also help with help saving bandwidth, which was like a big speed benefit. And of course, with metered connections, yeah, that helped a lot, because back then, nowadays, websites have like a lot of JavaScript, of course, and already the HTML code is pretty big. But back then, the handmade HTML code was pretty small, and the banners and the GIF animations and or also Flash content was by far outweighing the HTML code. So still, even nowadays, ad filtering makes like a big difference in speed and usability to me, but it's hard to get that across. Back then, the difference was even more staggering. I would say like the difference was like tenfold sometimes. If you had like an advertising heavy website, suddenly when you filtered out all the ads in the HTML code, it was instantly on screen, and you could read and use it. Yeah. So yeah, that was the highest voted features, and the initial filter lists were done completely by ourselves, and countless hours of like surfing sessions and trying to find websites that still were showing ads. It was mainly filtering by URL parts and typical advertising, image sizes. And we also quickly found out that just filtering by URLs and just filtering images was not enough, because even back then already like JavaScript played like a big role in websites, and was often used to interject to dynamically interject different kinds of ads. So without some form of JavaScript parsing, because you could not just kill all of the JavaScript code, of course. That would often render the website completely dysfunctional. So that became like one of the tricky parts back then, finding ways to filter JavaScript. But yeah, that definitely became essential. Oh, and the first prototype back then, it was still called Smart Surfer, because I unfortunately don't have a screenshot from back then. But yeah, Smart Surfer is still in the name, carries the original intent that we had of like smart assist, smart browsing helper. Oops, sorry. Yeah, and then the technology back then, because I'm saying in quotes, because yeah, there was like my first real program that I developed, and I had I had started out in like using Visual Studio, writing C++, just like really more or less professionally, only like maybe 2 years prior. And yeah, so it was like a learning experience for me, but definitely put in like a lot of time. So it was written in C++, multi-threading. I tried to design it by what were back then like best practices, using blocking TCP/IP calls in multi-threads, which on Windows was kind of like the way to go and worked really well. It was like a local proxy, so when you used it, you were basically running like a local proxy server, which of course for security reasons by default was only accepting local connections. And we implemented the deanimation, like only loading the first frame of the GIFs, rudimentary JavaScript parsing to work really sort of well, at least to get rid of most advertising. Also, the ones that were put into the website, like injected with JavaScript. Very important for us were like Roland and I were really seeing eye to eye on a lot of things, like ready to use defaults. Like back then, things were not really the usability of a lot of software was really not that great. Like it was like the running joke, Microsoft products, you basically had to invert all the default settings once to have reasonable defaults. That was often the case, and to us it was important. Like the filter list was built in, it was invisible. You could argue, okay, not really easily to adjust, but you could easily define additional filter entries. But yeah, to us it was important to have like a neat little program that was just ready to use and was like doing what it was supposed to do, without like all the without having like too much expert knowledge required. Like the big feature was the deanimation, but another thing was like Flash back then, which was everywhere, and I wish we could have like parsed it better and done more, which is nowadays like possible, of course. Everything usually being HTML5 and JavaScript based, you can do more in theory. And the initial version, of course, the big problem if you are not integrated in the browser, which was like far off back then, you have like no HTTPS filtering. Of course, there are ways then, like I can come to that later. We integrated that later on. And but in the initial version, that was like not possible, which but back then also like certificates for HTTPS sites were expensive, and only like the big companies usually had, if anybody like had HTTPS sites. Definitely private websites usually were not using secure connections. Yeah, so after finishing that prototype, we put it on the Siemens website. We had like our little anarchist corner there for the new business team, which was only the 3 of us or 4 of us. And it immediately blew up. We had like just with word by mouth, we had thousands of downloads in the very first days, which led to a big traffic spike on the Siemens website, and made admins kind of angry, and a lot of lower and middle management at Siemens. There was like a big outcry, and we caused a little bit of a controversy. Like media, like TV, suddenly were thrown into like TV and newspaper interviews that we had to give, which was I was 20 back then, so that was like definitely a learning experience. And they try to pitch us against like the main theme was Goliath, big conglomerate Siemens versus the little web admins, little private website owners, which was really ironic because it was like the the 3 of us. We already felt as like outcasts at Siemens, and now like the perception from the outside was we're like part of big Siemens, and it was all like very bizarre. To get this under the hood, and but the interesting thing, we thought we would get into more trouble. Like the lower and middle management was not amused, but I think it even got the attention of the CEO of Siemens back then, Heinrich von Pira, and like the higher ups at Siemens were kind of protecting us a little bit, because what we didn't think about it, Siemens being a big old German company with no like internet, like didn't really exist so much when you mentioned the name Siemens there. So it gave them a little bit of cloud, internet cloud back then. But because it blew up that much, we were absolutely swamped with support requests, and that led to our first hire. Like we had to create like support. We had to deal with like support. Shout out at this point to Wiebke, our first like support person, and also then later on like Micha and Benita doing quality assurance, and Wiebke for patients, especially right now. To me is interesting or funny because I'm again, after a couple of years of doing something completely different, I have like my own little specialty software program again that I'm developing and giving to users, and I have to deal with user support currently, with end user support, and I can't mention this enough. The patience required and like is often undervalued. Like my hats off to people like Wiebke and others, like support people, also people writing documentation, things like that are essential. And really can be really nerve-wracking. Without Wiebke, I would have been like completely screwed back then, because thousands of downloads. We were swamped with hundreds of emails daily. At the same time, of course, there were like a lot of happy users, and it was kind of mind-blowing to get so much feedback from all over the world. Like people that were, like I mentioned, the difference was staggering before and after, and like speed. And there were people basically, they were like, "Oh, holy ass, like this is mind-blowing," and then finally I can use the internet again. We got a lot of funny feedback back then. But we even ended up, like it became a thing, like Webwasher or washing, like friends, people that I met, they were calling like ad filtering, then like washing websites. That was really funny to me. And I have a little video here from one of the TV. Sorry, I have to jump in there. Like, honed our acting skills a little bit. Very cheesy now looking at it, but of course, now looking at this is kind of bizarre, because how the media pitted us against the content providers. It was, of course, not the right thing to do, to try to act cool and come across a little bit as even more threatening. But yeah, it was like an interesting learning experience also, that you couldn't really necessarily trust journalists when they were saying, telling you how they loved everything you were doing, only to then go around and make up stories, change everything with like off text, and screwing you over. It's like a learning lesson for sure. Yeah, so then we quickly realized, of course, like the whole point of new business opportunities at Siemens was like, create new business opportunities or find new things. And so we quickly realized, we saw that there was definitely potential for like a business model there. And that led to the founding of Webwasher Incorporated back then. Changed the name from Smart Surfer. Like we had like a long brainstorming session. Like it was like a little bit of a pun also at Siemens, because at least in Germany back then, Siemens, the connection that normal German would make to Siemens was like home appliances, especially washing machines. So filtering advertising was kind of like washing. So yeah, to us it was like kind of funny. We even had like little boxes that look like boxes of washing detergents with like Webwasher on it, stuff like that. Siemens was very helpful, though, on the other hand, helping us secure venture capital. And problem that I ran into at that point was I was doing everything by myself, the coding part, and I don't know if that changed, but as you all know, coders hate writing documentation. And so did I. And yeah, for technical due diligence to get venture capital, even if they badly want to give you money, you still have to go through technical due diligence. So Roland and I found each other, found us ourselves together to scramble and kind of fake technical documentation in one day by just throwing together as many screenshots as we could take and as many code comments as we could copy and paste together. Like a funny side story. I also remember a slightly bizarre conversations. It was all very like interesting back then because, like I said, I was 20, 21, and it was all pretty new. And it was pre dotcom bubble time. So like I remember one VC investment guy saying, yeah, the money is just laying on the street. You just need a big suitcase to sweep it all up. So yeah. Another funny side note from that time, if you want to make your CEO really mad, like we had one Associated Press interview, and while our CEO was spending a considerable amount of time fostering like local ties to the local community, business connections, securing grants and whatnot, instead of me talking about that the rich local computer history, culture, the infrastructure, and the human capital that we had in my hometown, like it was provided also, there was like a very strong computer sciences department at the local university. Instead of saying anything about that, regarding the question why, of all places, we founded this, we created this company in rural Germany in this small town. I said like, yes, it is pretty random, but it is quite random, but we could practically be in the middle of the jungle as long as we have like an internet connection. Yeah, it doesn't matter at all where we are. So that didn't really go over well with my CEO friend. And that was after I started the interview late and was being really cocky and said like, yeah, well, I usually come in late when I feel the most creative. That's usually when I mainly work during the day. I have like a little video here. Oops, sorry, I have to turn down the audio. That was basically the culture back then. It was all like fun and games still after work. We didn't do that all day, but like after a hard day of coding, we took out our RC cars and yeah, on the floor of our office started like RC racing, things like that. They just made it fun. Trips or visit our colleague in Spain, team building events. At that time, we had over 2 million users, and I looked it up back then. Allegedly, about like rough estimates, 250 million people worldwide were online. So having over 2 million users means that we almost like had 1% of all of these people were Webwasher users at some point. But yeah, at that point, like the advertising, the online ads became more and more dodgy. There were still no established like best practices. There was like more aggressive malware coming up. Tracking was standard by now. Like the 1 pixel transparent GIFs were everywhere. And that led to like a focus on more privacy filtering. And yeah, the advertising became much more dodgy with time. Like so, yeah, we started to focus on privacy much more slowly. And to compare to have a look at the desktop version back then, after we had our company, we finished like multi-platform support, made a Linux and a Mac version. There were no app stores yet. There was no iPhone yet, so everything was free to put on your website, free to download, free to install. It was easily set up. The client version was easily set up for groups and small offices. Thanks to our Spanish colleague who contacted us one day. He was very like familiar with like low-level Windows like system API hacking and hooking into system calls. Thanks to him, we were even able to come out with like a config-free version, basically config-free. Even the standard version before that already was taking care of trying to do like automatic configuration in the browser, like where you had to change your proxy settings. And the config-free version was like going around that completely because hooked in. It was kind of dodgy and took like a while to get it running bug-free, but it was hooking into the system calls, and as soon as it was running, it was automatically filtering all HTTP traffic on between the browser and the website, which is a kind of scary thought now thinking about it. But this was interesting challenge tool from changing from blocking like multi-threaded, having to deal with like more like an asynchronous event-driven real-time way of filtering. That was quite a challenge back then. The animated GIFs cutting off after the first frame was still like a big thing, and also the JavaScript filtering became much more important over time, of course, and became more advanced. Like I remember back then, I even implemented my own like our own little like JavaScript interpreter from scratch. By the way, also like the first client versions, everything was developed completely from scratch. There was no like standard code for HTTP proxy. No libraries were used. Which made a hell of a ride at times, but also very like the performance was really good, I would say. And we created some filtering techniques back then that I think are still relevant. That I don't know if they are like available like this in current advertising filters. So I implemented this JavaScript interpreter mainly for like proxy scripts, because in big companies they were using like proxy scripts, which were little JavaScript snippets that would randomly or pseudo randomly select a proxy server for you to use, and we had to support stuff like that. But it also helped with deeper analyzing JavaScript code, because it became more and more tricky to find ways to like cut only or disable only the parts in JavaScript that were meant to put advertising in the website. So that's also where I think it's I found it really interesting in preparing this talk, like comparing this like from more or less like 20 years ago to nowadays. And I think like one of the main points that I think are important, like the free distribution. I personally see like app stores made be extensions or any kind of app. I see this highly critical. Maybe I'm like hopelessly old school, but I want to own the hardware. I want to decide what I'm using, and I want to be the boss of what's happening on my computer. I don't want to be at the mercy of some big company that decides one day to the next that maybe what I'm using is not what they want me to use. So that's like a big thing to me, and I couldn't make it work well with the screen sharing app. Otherwise, I would have tried to do like a live demo, because like the last client version from almost 20 years ago is still running on like a current Windows system. Install works flawlessly. I can start it. I can put it as a proxy server. Of course, it doesn't support current standards, so it will slow things down. But it still worked really well. Of course, the filter lists are not up to date, so the filtering is not up to par, but it still works. yeah, and it has like it was harder in the past, of course, dealing with all the proprietary formats back then, like Flash. Like I said, to this day, I wish we could have done more, but most of the time it was only feasible to kill it completely. Yeah, instead of analyzing it. And yeah, HTTPS was always like an issue, which is of course much easier. Like compared to the present, if you're a browser extension, you don't have to worry about stuff like that. Filtering in general is harder. Like when you're a standalone program, you have to do everything by hand yourself, like DOM parsing and filtering formats. But nowadays, adoption, usability, much better, which leads to higher adoption. But like I said, the mercy big tech companies, that's something I see critical. Then we went on, we created like an enterprise version. This was like still on our roadmap. We had to change, we had to create like a web GUI. We created like a cross-platform version for Windows, Linux, Solaris, automated build process, Q&A testing. We were also like adopting ICAP, the ICAP and the Internet Content Adaptation Protocol, Web Cache Communication Protocol. We are also involved with like driving development of that. Had like hurdles, especially Solaris, amazingly, was still a thing back then, big companies. So adapting to that was like tricky. And but everything started to change, and the domain categorization part became much more important slowly. And we, in my opinion, lost track of the original ideas that we had. Like, of course, understandably, there was like pressure for profit. The venture capital companies were increasingly impatient. We managed to get like a lot of Fortune 500 clients. For example, Lehman Brothers, rest in peace, managed to break even, survived the dot-com bubble, but yeah, the main driver was between like behind malware filtering, security filtering. The main driver was like domain categories. Like we categorized domains in different categories that they could be filtered. So companies could select my employees from time X to Y are only allowed to visit these and that websites, or otherwise I'll be notified, or if they visit certain categories, I will get notified. And I call this like growing pains, because around that time I also became I was among like a bunch of people that had like problems with the orientation of the company, and yeah, everybody became more stressed. The fun went out, and in my opinion, we lost sight of the original spirit and a lot of the original ideas, which in my opinion were back then still up for grabs, since Google was not what it is today. So a lot of these ideas are now completely covered by all the Google services and websites. So yeah, the company still lives on to this day, which I'm kind of proud about. So from a business perspective, it was successful. It got sold to different companies over the years, different mergers. Currently, it exists at McAfee Web Gateway again, in like under the roof of McAfee Germany, and yeah, and so in the end, a little bit like quickly about me. Like after all of this, I left the company. I felt like a little bit burned out. I learned about a phrase that was coined during the birth of the dot-com bubble back then, quarter life crisis. which now in hindsight sounds very like hashtag first world problem, of course. But yeah, after I felt lost, pretty much, I relocated and I turned my hobby into my hobby and passion into my main job, and worked somehow made it worked as a video producer and like cinematographer and in media for like a good 10 years now, and combined my love for like creative arts with like my inner tech geek, because like even in a video and like post-production and the post-production field is very like tech heavy, code heavy, and yeah, the one thing that that I found myself in like over the years before was always like between the chairs, sort of, because I like in our company and at Webwasher, there was like the coders versus like the marketing creative side, and I always found myself kind of like in between that. I found like the creative side definitely also very interesting. So that brings me quickly to the last slide. I'm like, I knew that it was happen, that would happen. Like it was like I tried to cramp in a little bit too much, maybe. So my parting thoughts would be like I'm for 10 years I've like crossed the fence sort of, and I'm still very critical of advertising in general, like advertising agencies. No comment. I worked for them and with them a lot, and I would not cry one tear if a lot of these companies don't exist anymore. And yeah, the scarcest good is our time and our attention, and but everything is connected. I also learned a lot about like how monetization of creative content is like a big issue, and which I found really hard to grasp back then, and which I was like very cocky about, I have to say, and I understand this more now. And I think like a little like fortune cookie quote, like you have to remember where you're coming from to know where you're going, because I think like not much has changed in question mark, because a lot of things are still relevant and still pretty much done the same. When I looked at, I mean, I've been out of the game now for like quite a while. Even though I'm like back in since like 1 or 2 years now, I'm back at coding with like a little software project. But yeah, so that's it for me, basically.
Yeah, that was quite a trip, and
Yeah, I
yeah, go ahead.
noticed that it was it felt a little bit like trying to edit like a video, because yeah, you have to weed out. I know the sun came out and I look very pasty now. Sorry for that.
Let's go into questions since we don't have that much time.
Yeah,
I'll start
yes.
one by Vardarajan Sridharan, which is good to know the backstory. What do you think would be the top feature request if you rebuilt Webwasher today?
Oh, the top feature request. Oh, that's a good question. From like a user perspective?
I suppose so.
If I would rebuild it. I mean, advertising filtering is already like done by like everybody, so I really have to. I almost wanted to mention that on the last slide, that I'm wary of like a lot of. I find that interesting, especially like the connection to like societal issues. What's going on in the world right now, like content providers. I'm highly critical of this whole like connection, like your browser is made by the company that provides the content and connects your data with everything. That is nothing that we saw back then. So like, I basically jumped a little bit. Look at me like somebody who jumped like through like a time warp tunnel from like 1998, 1999, and I'm like, yeah, this all doesn't make much sense nowadays to me. So I'm using it, but it's really weird. I guess everybody is saying it this year that this feels a little bit like a weird parallel reality, that we took like the wrong turn somewhere.
Yeah, maybe it's the wrong timeline.
Yeah, it's the wrong timeline. So yeah, that's so it was fitting that I am giving this talk this year.
Yeah, there's another question by Kairek, which is basically, did you ever receive complaints or any legal threats by?
Yes, sorry, I think I forgot. I jumped over this. I forgot to mention this. Yeah, we already back then had like had this like also I forgot to mention that back then in 1998 was already like when the whole controversy came up, when we like everybody was downloading it, and we were pitted against like the little like website content providers, website admins. There was already like a little company then making like a little server product that they tried to advertise that was filtering out or detecting when somebody used Webwasher. So this whole like what you guys already talked about started was already around back then, this like kind of war. Like yeah, I'm already like I'm always happy nowadays when I find a way around that. But yeah, we were like sued by or tried to sue by advertisers, but it was yeah, they had no chance. It didn't make any sense. I think we were still protected by the Siemens legal department, thankfully, back then, and didn't have to pay for ourselves. But I don't think they ended up having to pay anything. I don't think it went much, went far at all.
Okay, the next question by Max Ludov. Any female developers or others of Webwasher we should know about?
Female developers. We had female developers on the team. Yeah. Yeah, like a shout out to all my ex colleagues. I put me on the spot now. Like I don't remember everybody's name. Like Eddie, Peter, and like all the other people. Like I should have researched this more. Like have mercy on me. It's like 20 years ago, but we had like like our Q&A department. Testing was run by Benita. Like yeah, we had like a bunch of women working in our company.
The other question is, how did you monetize Webwasher? What was there for the VCs?
They completely banked on the idea like that our business plan would work out, because there was also something I wanted to mention, because like I jumped over it. Like they became impatient because of course the problem was back then the desktop version was not enough to make enough money, but because it was kind of like negware only. It was meant for like use for free, non-commercially, otherwise you have to pay, which of course is not really a sustainable business model. And I would have posed the question, seeing like how companies now are around with like that where it works out business wise. So I would say I guess it should have worked, but somehow like our business plan was making the what I mentioned quickly, the corporate version, the business version that was like running on the servers and providing like filtering company wide. Even like our spam filter at some point was used by one of the biggest providers here, T-Online, for all the emails, stuff like that. That was our business model, like Fortune 500 companies. And the categorization thing, we had like 80 like surf masters, like people that were categorizing internet websites all day, which was like a really hard job, because you can imagine you see like a lot of horrible stuff then also. But that was the main feature. If I would have been better with my time, I would have talked a little bit more about that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's great. So we are basically out of time. We have one more question, but maybe we'll just port it over to the Slack. Thanks so much, Sören, for sharing your whole story. It was fascinating.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'll be on Slack. I'll try to answer some questions there.
All right. So in just a minute, we'll start our next talk. See you then.
Thank you. Bye.